What's up guys? In today's video we're going to be talking about arrays, or to be more specific, one-dimensional arrays. And I can say from experience that arrays are something that definitely come up a lot on the AP test. So it's a good idea to get as much practice in as you can before you take that test. And I have a couple of resources where you can get as much practice in as you can. But first let's talk about what an array is. Array is basically a data structure that lists elements of the same object type. So you can have an array of int, you can have an array of string, you can have an array of doubles, and it's initialized by brackets. So that's how you know it's an array. And one thing to really keep in note, and I think we've talked about this in the past, array index values all start at 0. So they don't start at 1, they start at 0. So the first element in an array would be 0. And an array is something that's also used in modern speaking language. Someone could say something like, oh man, there's a wide array of people here, and that would just mean there are different people here. And I guess array could also mean variety. But let's talk about the initialization. So this is one initialization method that I used. So we have int array data, because obviously you need to have your identifier and you need to have your object type. So we have our int array data is equal to new data 10. And when you put the 10 inside those brackets, that means that the array is going to be of size 10. So it's automatically going to initialize 10 spots, or 0 to 9. And what we do here is this is how you initialize specific elements in that array. So you have your data bracket 0 is equal to 4. So the first element in this array is going to be 4. And the next one would be 2, and the next one would be 3. That's just one way to initialize it. But an easier way of initializing would be to say int array data is equal to, and then with curly braces and a semicolon at the end, 424. And this creates 3 elements of your array. And if we print out our data of 0 at index 0, it'll print out 4 because we already initialized 424, and that would be our array. And here's some practice that I gave you. You can pause the video to, I guess, study the array and figure out what it is, but these are for the most part very easy. So we have our int age array, and oh, I even forgot our little array there, but this basically says int array age array is equal to, and with our braces, 16, 42, 98, 53, 23, and 102. And this asks age array of 1 equals what? And obviously it equals 42 because the 16 is the 0 index and 42 is the first one. And obviously the next one would be 98. And then I just said system.out.println ageArray.length. And one thing to note, when we're working with strings and we want to find the length of that string, we use the length method, which is characterized by length parentheses. But for the array, you want to remember that the length method, or the length function, doesn't have your opening and closing parentheses. And you'll get an error actually if you use that, because the length parentheses is used for string types. So this says system.out.println ageArray.length. And this will in turn print out the length of the array. So what we can do is we can count up the indexes. And like we said, an array starts at 0, but that doesn't mean that when counting the length that starts at 0. So when counting the length we start at 1. So we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And in turn we'll print 6. And this arrays.sort age array, I'm not going to talk about that much. But what this will do is it'll sort the array from decreasing to increasing value, and then when we system.out.println arrays.toString of age array, that'll print out that sorted array. And the only reason why we need to use this toString method is that if we didn't use that toString method, the array would not print out the elements inside it. It would in turn print out the addresses at which it is stored, because again, in Java everything is an object and is stored as is in a specific data field. But to use the toString method, that will print out the elements of the array. So more arrays. So here what we're doing is setting a string array. So string array the array is equal to, in quotes, ABC, comma, DEF, comma, GHI, comma, JKL. And like you see, every element of an array is separated by a comma. And so if we say system.out.println the array.length, obviously it's very self-explanatory. We can just say 1, 2, 3, 4, and this will print out 4. And now we have just some different operators, and it says the array 3 mod 2. And like we said, mod is the remainder, so 3 by 2 you have a remainder of 1. And that'll in turn print out DEF, because that is the first index. And this just says the array 7 divided by 2, and 7 divided by 2 is not a whole integer value, it's actually a decimal. But again, in Java, when you're dividing, you won't get decimals unless you're working with doubles, and so this will print out 3, because that's the lowest number at which 2 goes into 7. And then if we look at the third element, that would be 0, 1, 2, 3, so this should print out JKL. And now the last function says the array of 2 dot charat 2, and we're using our charat method that we looked at in our strings video, and this basically says the array of 2, and we count that up, that would be 0, 1, 2, so that would be our GHI string, and it says charat 2, and so we start at 0, 1, 2, so this should print out I. Now, array and for loops. So a cool thing that you can do with for loops is loop through the elements of an array, and you can manipulate the array and get certain data out of that. So this says int array data is equal to 4 and the contents of that array. And what we can do is use a for loop to print out each element of that array on one line. And so again, with our for loop format, we say for int I is equal to 0, I is less than data.length, and I++. This is kind of really the basic format when working with for loops in an array. Obviously you'll initialize in an I at 0. You don't want to initialize it at 1 because, again, every array element starts at 0. And then you want to set it less to the data.length. Because if I reached data.length, then we would obviously get an out of bounds exception error, and then I++. And then we can go ahead and print out data of I, and that should print out every element of the array. So what we're going to do now is take a look at a couple practice problems that are going to be beneficial in understanding for loops and in arrays. What I did here is I created 3 problems that'll hopefully test your knowledge on for loops and arrays and how they work together. Again, I advise you to pause the video and try to figure these out on your own, but the first one says, count the number of 7s in the 7 array. And obviously you have to use a for loop. And you really want to get into the idea of understanding how for loops work through an array. You want to understand how a for loop can be used to loop through each element of an array and test and check certain things. So this basically says count the number of 7s in this array, and I just initialize this array. It really doesn't matter, but it's more important to understand the logic behind this. So we have our for loop, and again we're going to use our really basic format of int I equals 0. Doesn't have to be I again. And we can say the 7 array dot length without those parentheses and I++. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to set an int and we're going to call it count. And what this will do is this will be our int for counting the amount of 7s in the array. And we can say if the 7 array and then bracket I equals 7 count, and we can use our increment operator plus plus. And whoops, I forgot to set this to 0. We were getting an error there. And basically what this will do is this will start at the element of 0, which is I, and it'll say if the 7th array of 0 is equal to 7, count plus plus, and if not, it'll keep looping through, and it'll keep going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 until we get to the length of the array minus 1, and it'll keep looping through, and if it equals 7, it'll keep incrementing this count. And then what we can do is we can just really quickly print out you have, and then we can plus count. And then if we really want to format, because I feel like some people hate that spacing issue, and this will basically say you have count 7s in your array. And if we go ahead and run this, we actually want to put this print statement out of the array, because if we put that print statement within our array, it's going to print that statement a bunch of times. So if we go ahead and run this outside of the print statement, this will in turn say, you have 6 7s in your array. And what this was doing, again, I was incrementing each time, and it was checking each time if the I at that element of the array equaled 7. And if it did, it would increment that count. If not, it would just keep restarting the loop until it reached the length of the array minus 1. And I'll go ahead and leave that up there because that's something that I feel can come in handy when working with for loops and arrays. And the next problem says print true if 6 appears as either the first or the last element in the array. So we can just really quickly set an int array nums, and we can initialize that with 2, 4, 7, 8, 6. And obviously this will print true, but again, we're just going for the logic of this. So we can say if nums, and we use our brackets to indicate which element or index, if nums of 0 is equal to 6, and then we can use our OR operator, nums, and then here we're going to do length minus 1 equals 6. System.out.println true. Whoops, we have to change this to nums.length minus 1. And so this is saying, this asks if a 6 appears in the first or the last element of the array. And obviously we get our first element by that array of 0 because again, every element of an array starts at 0. And then to get the last element of the array, we do the length of the num, or the array, minus 1. Because again, the length starts at 1, but the element started at 0. So to get the last element, you always do length minus 1. And if that equals 6, then it prints true. If we go ahead and run this, obviously it's going to print true because we have a 6 at the end. I don't need to show that. And that's basically how that works. And then we can go ahead and slide these all up. Delete this. And this next question says print true if the array is length 1 or more and the first element equals the last element. So we can actually use just the 7 array, and we can just print to that, and we can just say if the 7 array dot length is greater than 1, and then we can just use brackets here, and then we can use a nested if statement here and say if the 7 array of 0, because again that 7 array of 0 will indicate the first element, equals the 7 array of the 7 array dot length minus 1, system.out.println elements first and last are true. And what we can really quickly do is set this to 7. And if we go ahead and run this, this will say elements first and last are true. And again, what we did is we just used a nested if statement to say if the 7 array dot length is greater than 1, then we can do this. Because if the length isn't more than 1, then there's no point because you only have one element in your array. And then we go to our next if statement that says if the 7 array of 0 is equal to the 7 array of the 7 array length minus 1, which will be the last element. So if those two are equal, then obviously system.out.println elements first and last are true. So I hope that kind of gave you a better understanding of how arrays work. The next video is going to consist of a problem that's going to incorporate more and a lot of the things that we've been talking about. We're also going to be talking about array lists. So I hope this video was very helpful for you, and I hope that these practice problems have been very helpful. If you have any suggestions of how you would prefer me to do certain things, feel free to contact me. I can post my email in the description. But thanks for watching this video.